Hello and welcome to the first Access Chat of a brand new shiny decade. It's not just Happy New Year, it's Happy 2020, Happy New Decade. So we're in the roaring 20s now. So get out your flapper dresses and make sure that we do all of the hedonistic things that you've always wanted to do. Talking of hedonism and things that are creative and really out there. Poetry is one of those things. I'm delighted today to welcome Dave Steele, who is the blind poet. So, Dave, you've been writing about poetry since what, 2014? Is that right? You discovered that you had retinitis pigmentosa around that time.
Absolutely, that's when I was diagnosed. It was April 2014 when I was first diagnosed with RP, and I started writing the poetry at the end of that year with regards to everything that I was going through in sight loss.
Okay. How did you write before? I did English and history. I wrote some very bad poems, and I studied poetry quite a bit. But where did you discover your talent? Was it something that you already had that you returned to?
Yeah, kind of. I worked as a singer all of my life for the best part of 20 odd years beforehand. When I was, you'll relate to this being this from the UK. When I was 18 and I left college, I wanted to work in entertainment. I'd always wanted to be a singer from the moment I could really talk and sing and love music. And I went away and worked at the Holiday Park. So I was a blue coat for a company called Pontins, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. And I went and worked away. Yeah. I was a touring cabaret. I sang on cruise ships and hotels abroad, different locations across the UK and Europe. And so music and poetry were the same thing to me. I'd written some songs previously, not really any volume of songs, but a few songs and a few poems when I was younger. But it wasn't up until I was diagnosed with RP in April 2014, at the end of that year when I was really struggling, when I started to turn to poetry and began to write about everything that I was going through.
And you've written a book of poetry. Is it Stand By Me RP? Is correct?
Yeah,
right?
3 books now. So
wow.
Basically, the way it came about was when I was diagnosed with RP in April 2014. I went for a routine eye test. I knew that we had RP in my family. So for those of people out there that don't know anything about RP or retinitis pigmentosa, as it's called, it's a hereditary condition, so it runs in the family. The particular gene type that we have in my family, there's a 1 in 2 chance every time of it being developed. So it's what they call a dominant type of RP. So it comes from my mum's side. My sister was the first person to be diagnosed with it, and my mum is now completely blind with it. And I was told that it wouldn't affect me until I was an old man, until I was in like my 60s or something. When my sister was first diagnosed with it at a hospital in Moorfields, called Moorfields in London, which is now one of the sort of leading eye hospitals in the world. In the early 80s, she was told, you have this thing called RP, you're probably going to go blind, it's hereditary, so don't have any kids. And that's pretty much all she was told. There's no treatment or cure, that's it. There wasn't much information. So when I first heard about it, as I said, I didn't think it was going to affect me. I probably had the early onset of RP in my early 20s, but it was a very gradual loss. Now, the way people lose the sight with RP is, for those of you who don't know, it starts off with night blindness, so struggling from light to dark places. So, for example, a normal person walking from a lighted environment into maybe like a cinema, it'll take them a couple of seconds for their eyes to adjust. For someone with night blindness, their eyes won't adjust. So when I was in my early 20s, I probably had the first sort of stages of night blindness. The next stage after that is you tend to lose your peripheral vision. So like a tunnel going inwards, it's why they call it tunnel vision. And then you lose your central vision last to then you can't recognize faces. So I used to get myself checked every couple of years just to make sure that I was still okay for driving and things like that. And when I was 38, nearly 6 years ago now, I walked into a routine eye test and they looked in the back of my eyes and they said, look, the pigment is really, really thick at the back of your eyes. You need to stop driving straight away. I'd only just got engaged. Myself and my fiance were planning to get married the following year. We just had a son together who was 6 months old, and I had to walk out and tell my future wife that I was no longer able to drive. I told my work, they let me go. I lost my job. I have a daughter who lives in Glasgow by a previous relationship, so I couldn't drive and get her for the weekend once a month, as I was doing, driving 3.5 hours to Scotland one weekend every month. And things got really, really tough for a while. We applied for all the support that was out there, things like personal independence payment. Now, that's the main kind of benefit support here in the UK for someone with a disability. And when I applied for it, after I was diagnosed that April in 2014, there was a 9-month waiting list before you received a payment and before you got assessed. So for 9 months as a family, we were in limbo. And unfortunately, with the situation we were in, we couldn't afford the rent in the house we were staying in at the time. So we lost our house. We had to feed our kids on food parcels because we couldn't afford while we were waiting for these kind of things, the support network to come through. We had tried everywhere, and it was a real struggle. And all the while, my sight was declining quite rapidly. I lost all my peripheral in the first 6-7 months. And I was really struggling with anxiety and depression, not only for the sight that I was losing, but for the financial pressure I was putting on my family. So my sister, who I said was the first one to be diagnosed, had advised me to go on to social media, some of the support groups on the likes of Facebook, to speak to people who were going through the same kind of thing as me. Because when you're diagnosed with these types of conditions these days, it's quite often done in a very cold clinical environment. You're told, what the condition is, what the effects are, and that's pretty much it. You might be given a card for a support network or whatever. And a lot of people tend to slip through the net. So my sister advised me, because I was struggling with how quickly I was losing my sight, to speak to people online, which I did. I went on and joined some of these support groups. And then through that, I got asked to attend a meeting in Newcastle in the UK for people with RP and Usher syndrome, which is deafblindness, same sight loss, but with hearing loss. And when they heard I was going to be attending, they'd heard I was a singer, and they said to me, would you be our entertainment for the day? Would you come and sing for us at the support meeting? So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that, because for me, that was where I felt comfortable. On stage or in front of a crowd, an audience, is my kind of comfort zone. It was other things like going out, struggling with low vision in a busy place and holding on to my son's pram because I was feeling anxious. That was the things that I'd get nervous about. So when they asked me to sing, I was like, yeah, absolutely. So the night before the event, I was in bed with my wife and she was trying to get to sleep. And I had this idea where I thought, if I could take a song that everyone knew, but change the words so it would have more of an emotional response, more of an impact when I sang it. So I chose the song Stand By Me by Benny King, you were just referring to there, because I like the opening line of "When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see," because that was like night blindness to me. So within 20 minutes, I rewrote the song, because, as I said, music and poetry, it's the same thing, it's lyrics. And I rewrote the song and then performed it the following day. And then I was completely kind of overwhelmed with the impact. People were saying to me after I sang it, they were in tears, and they were saying that I was able to describe how they'd always felt about their journey with sight loss, but they weren't able to find the words themselves. So that's where the poetry came from. And that's why the books and everything else going forward was called Stand By Me RP, because it came from that song. I released it onto YouTube. It kind of went viral. And then I started writing poetry every day, sometimes 2 or 3 a day, just to try to get it out of my system of what we were going through, but also getting those messages back from people saying it was helping them, was giving me, well, put it this way, I always say that when I started to lose my sight, I went through a lot of the things that people tend to go through with those sort of diagnoses. I lost my confidence, I lost my independence through my low vision, but the biggest thing it kind of took from me was my purpose. I didn't know what I was going to do next. So when I was at my lowest and I found these words that were helping people, that then sort of went, okay, well, I can do this. So that's when I started to write every day, to the point now, 6 years later, I've written over 700 poems and 3 books.
Wow.
So, Dave, I know that I was very honored to have you on my show, Human Potential at Work, and I thought, well, you definitely need to be on AXSChat. But
thank you.
I know we talked about this a little bit on my program, but the comment that was made to your sister, don't have kids. I
Yeah.
know that has been a very powerful part of your journey. And of course, how ridiculous are we saying don't have kids because if, your child might go blind in the future and that's not, so they don't even deserve to live. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so
I mean, that's
many,
just ridiculous.
it's so ridiculous because
Uh-huh.
being blind is, I had a friend of mine that was blind say it's not a tragedy, it's an inconvenience. It's an
We
inconvenience.
all have different challenges.
Yeah, and so what does that say to you as a father? Because don't have kids, but you have kids. And I know that
Well,
you've
yeah.
written a beautiful poem for your daughter, and you're going to give us
Yeah. My
Stu
son
some
as well.
poems. But I was just wondering if you would talk a little bit about what that does to your head for a doctor, because they're experts, right? To
Yeah.
tell
Well,
your sister not to have kids.
yeah. Well, when I was diagnosed, my sisters said, when she was diagnosed, it was in the early 80s, and they didn't really have a lot of information there, nowhere near where they're up to now. Things have moved on, a lot. So when I was diagnosed, it's nearly 6 years ago now, I knew there was a chance of my children possibly having RP when they're older, but I didn't know what the chances were. That information wasn't around back when my sister was diagnosed. So once I was declared what they call severely sight impaired here in the UK, which is legally blind, I then had to go for genetic counselling, as they call it, genetic testing, where they take a sample of blood, and then so many months later, I think it was about 4 to 5 months, we got the results through, and myself and my wife, as she was at the time then, Amy, or she is now, she's not gone, she's still here, she's in the kitchen. We had to sit in a doctor's waiting room and find out for the first time that our son, who had just turned 1 at the time, had a 1 in 2 chance of going blind when he was older, and same with my daughter, who is now 12. And we didn't know that it was a 1 in 2 chance. I had people would say to me online, oh well, if I'd have known that, I wouldn't have had kids. And it's like, you can't, you can't plan for things like that. We didn't know, and I wouldn't change them for the world. And that's part of the thing that inspires me to do what I do now. It's I want to show my son Austin and my daughter Ellie all the things that you can do despite any challenges in life, despite any limitations. It shouldn't stop you. With accessible technology and all of the support that's out there these days, how lucky we are in the world now with everything that we've got. There's no reason you can't go on and do amazing things in your life, and that is the thing that really drives me on to do what I do and support other people.
Yeah, it's sort of chilling to think that people think it's better to not ever be born than someday maybe become blind in your life.
I've been on trains before where I've heard
chilling.
that conversation. That conversation's
Wow.
happened in front of me, where I've had 2 people sat on the seats next to me, and they've said, oh, I'd rather be dead than blind. And I'm like, I'm right here. I'm not deaf.
Oh my God. Oh
But
my God.
it's commonplace that those things do happen.
It's just
It's
chilling. I
it's
know
kind of like
Antonio. Yeah. Go ahead, Dave.
No, I was just going to say,
Kind of
it's
like,
kind of like that thing. You ever see where, you have like in a TV show, it's, things like Friends, for example, where there'll be a conversation going on one side of the room and you've got people in the background and they're about 2 foot away, but apparently no one can hear. It's almost like they think it's like that. They're sat 2 foot away from you saying these things. It's like, I'm right here.
wow. I know Antonio has a question. Let me turn the mic to him.
Sure.
There are so many life conditions that that you can't predict in life from an accident. So people cannot just life is not perfect. It will never be. So what I wanted to ask is about when you started to look at channels in social media to know more and to get in touch with other people. How valuable were you able to find that information?
Very valuable with regards to initially the majority of things I was hearing, because there's a lot of, with something like retinitis pigmentosa, there's still a lot unknown about that condition. The retinal specialists and everyone in that kind of field will only look at it from a very clinical kind of background. So when I speak to people all over the world, as I have been able to do through social media, people will say that they suffer with if they have certain symptoms due to their retinitis pigmentosa, for example, low energy, feeling lethargic late on in the day. And a lot of people say they all suffer, they all have this low energy because of their RP, but then you'll say to a specialist about it, is that related? And they say, no, it's not. But it is, but for different reasons. With things, with for example, with the low energy that I was just talking about, the way that comes into play is where the retinal specialists don't see it is because I've got a very small tunnel of vision. So just to show you what I can see at the moment is my left eye, I can't see out of at all. That's completely blurred now. And my right eye is pretty much just like looking through a straw. So when I'm going about my day-to-day business, using a cane or using my guide dog or just getting around, I have to scan a lot to see where I'm going because I have no peripheral vision. And it's almost like the same kind of energy someone would use driving a long distance, because you have to concentrate when you're driving, and when you drive sat down for like 4 hours, you feel very tired. For someone with low vision, because they're having to concentrate so much more than a fully sighted person just to get around and do simple tasks, it tends to wipe you out. So things like that, I wouldn't have known about. If I hadn't spoke to other people, I would have thought that I was the only one. And still to this day, when I speak to people around the world, things like headaches through light sensitivity and things like that, they'll speak to specialists and they'll say, oh, it's not related to the condition, but we all have it. So getting to speak to people who are going through the same things, not just physically, but emotionally as well, was a massive, massive support to get me where I needed to be.
It's
so
quite
I think that's
interesting.
really interesting. Go on, Hunter.
No, that the doctors are saying the one thing is not related when that's part of your your social life and your daily activities are the ones, and your condition are the ones creating your situation. So it's actually related. So
Yeah,
it's just
absolutely.
it's just a question of the doctors are looking that from a clinical perspective, but there's also the social aspect that needs to be incorporated on the way how they look at the person that they have in front of them.
There's one more thing that I was talking about this with Debra just over a week ago, that a lot of people, even with sight loss, don't realise, and that is something that's related specifically to a retinal disease like mine, because the retina is basically something that sends, sees what the eyes are seeing and then sends the signal to the brain for the brain to, with the words, I've lost the word. You know what I'm going to say? To process it, yeah. To basically process it. And my retinas don't work properly. One of the weirdest things it does, and this is where a lot of the anxiety comes from for people with low vision. If I am in an open environment like a park where there's not a lot of moving objects and it's quite quiet, I can feel like I could see almost like a normal, fully sighted person. But then if I turn a corner and there's a lot of moving objects, for example, people or cars or whatever, my retinas can't deal with that picture and it becomes almost mixed up, and then I go completely blind within a split second. And that can be one of the most anxious things about living with something like RP, is the fact that I could literally, feel as if I'm seeing okay and then turn a corner and then I go completely, it's almost like being fogged over. But it's because the retinas can't interpret the signal. It's like, if I'm watching a film, I can't watch fight scenes in superhero films, because once there's a lot of moving objects and it starts moving quite quickly, my eyes can't deal with it and I go completely fogged over. So a lot of people, when you think about blindness and low vision, will think either, like a lot of the misconceptions, you're either completely blind or you're not at all, or you only see one way the entire time. And that's not the way. With a lot of people with low vision, there's a lot of different things that affect how I see the objects that we're just talking about that are in front of me. It could be the weather, the light, how I'm feeling if I'm ill. If I'm feeling, if I've got the flu, my eyes aren't great, and I'll have bad days. Stress as well. If I'm stressed, that affects my vision as well. So there's lots of different factors that will affect it.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I think it's often the case that that the medical profession focus purely on the causality and the pure medical symptoms. They don't think about the impacts and the side effects of the conditions and the other impacts, the knock-on effects of a lot of conditions that affect the rest of your life. And I've got quite a number of friends that have RP, and they're all reporting exactly the things that you talk about. The tiredness, the effort that it takes to be concentrating, and everything else.
I always say it's constantly adjusting. That's the hardest part. It's the constantly adjusting.
And I think that I can empathise to a certain extent, because being dyslexic and ADHD, there's an awful lot of effort taken in focusing, and also when I'm trying to read, keeping stuff, keeping my focus on that, and yeah, you get tired, and it becomes harder to do this stuff when you're tired. It's easier to read a page of text in the morning than it is in the evening when I've had a long day. So I totally get the whole sort of cognitive load that you're getting, but I was interesting to hear about the processing part. I think that's really that makes a lot of sense to me, because I totally understand how your brain needs to process stuff, and what you see is not what you see. For example, I have quite a prominent nose. It's quite large, right? But I don't see my own nose.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't. But because your brain filters out your nose when you have binocular vision.
The other thing with that as well is, and this is a really scary part that I speak to a lot of people about, is when you walk into a room, your brain subconsciously scans that room, and for someone who maybe have not perfect vision, it tends to fill in the blanks for what your eyes can't see. So there's a lot of people, and I especially get this when I speak to people in America, who will say to me, I'm suffering with night blindness now because of RP, so I don't drive at night anymore, but I drive in the daytime, which is very different here. But they don't realise that they probably think they can see more than they actually can, and it's not until their eyes are tested in a proper clinical environment that they actually realise that, oh my God, I'm actually a lot blinder than I thought I was. There was a bus driver who was actually sent to prison in Ireland a few years back, who had Usher syndrome. He was deaf-blind, and he was driving a bus because he thought that he could see more than he actually could, and he ended up killing his passengers. But going back to what you were saying there about the clinical environment thing, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this. I speak about this a lot now. I think that it's the most difficult part of living with low vision for me personally, other than the hereditary side of things for my children, is the misconceptions. It's not so much the physical limitations of my low vision. It's the lack of education and lack of or the amount of misconceptions that are out there about blindness, that are the things that really hold people back. People say to me, I'm not blind enough yet to use a cane, I'm not blind enough yet to use a guide dog, and I'll say to them, why do you think that? And they say, well, you've got to look a certain way to you've got to have a certain level of sight loss to use a cane or use a guide dog. You've got to be completely blind to use a guide dog. And I say, well, look, do you find yourself not going out to certain places because of your vision? Do you find yourself staying in more and becoming more isolated because, you don't go to certain places because maybe it's too dark or too busy? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, well, you're ready then. But because they don't fit into this perceived box of what blindness looks like, as we just talked about, they become needlessly isolated and stay in more and won't use the aids and mobility aids and tools that are out there for them, because they're scared of what other people think. and
Yeah.
especially guys as well. Guys are really are really perfect for this. I speak to a lot of men all over the world who say, I don't want to use a cane because I feel like I'm going to be seen as vulnerable or a target or less of a man, and that's not the case at all.
No.
It's actually, you're actually more of a man and stronger for getting out there and saying, no, this is what I need to do it, but it's not going to stop me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm very, yes, absolutely. My own father didn't want to accept that whole piece.
Yeah,
I think it's really, it is a generational thing. Having worked with assistive tech for the last 20 years, I'll be taking everything that's on offer when it comes to me, right?
Absolutely, same. Yeah,
I'm gonna grasp it, but there is this whole thing about not being disabled enough. At what point, am I, because especially when it's cognitive, it's like, do I qualify?
yeah.
Do I have a right to speak about this stuff? Am I part of the community or am I not?
Yeah, the system has a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the system unfortunately makes people, especially here in the UK, makes people have to really, prove their disabilities more than they should have to. And that's not fair. I've been a big campaigner since I went through it myself of trying to find out why it shouldn't be so simple as if a doctor registers someone as legally blind, then automatically they should get the support that's needed and not have to prove it to someone who doesn't know anything about sight loss, as you have to do with personal independence payment and things like that. The horror stories that we've all heard out there from these kind of things, and it's not just the UK, it's all over, where people have to prove a disability when they shouldn't need to. It's about supporting the right people in the right way, and yeah, we should never have to do that. And that is another thing that kind of it has inspired me to do what I do now and write the things that I write, because it's not only about supporting people and their families who are going through the same kind of thing that I've gone through, but also creating more awareness and saying that you don't look blind. No one looks blind. You don't have to look a certain way to have low vision. Talking about invisible disabilities, which is obviously a massive thing these days now, and we're starting to pay attention a little bit more.
Dave, I know that you are a world famous poet now, and you have gone tours all over the world, and recently you've done one in the U.S. and you're coming back to the U.S. and I was hoping that you might share some of your poems. You shared a poem after we went off air that you wrote for your daughter, which actually made me tear up, and I was wondering, just selfishly, if you would share that one, and then maybe you can share another one. But I think that there's so much I love about your story, but I know that you had said that when you had come, you also had told a story on air where there was a gentleman that came to one of your readings, and I hope you're remembering which one I'm talking about.
Course,
but he was, I just thought that one really, so much of your interview really touched my soul. And so I was wondering if you would talk about that gentleman and maybe do the poem that you wrote for your daughter, and maybe one more too, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah. Well, going back on the gentleman we were just talking about, who's called Derek, I'm a great believer. I was talking about this earlier today with someone that came to see me, how everything happens for a reason. And the things that we go through in our past give us the ability to do things going forward. A great believer in that. For example, I spent a bit of time when I was in my formative years, early 20s, when I was working as a singer. I was talking about me working at Pontins in the UK, which was seasonal work. So you'd work in the summer, and in the winter time, there wasn't any work until the summertime. It was only like, you get a little bit of work at Christmas, but then like January, February, there was no work until like the start of the summer again. So I didn't have a family home. And when I was working places, I'd go all over the world and work as a singer. But then when I didn't have any work, I had nowhere to live. So there was times where I ended up homeless. There was, there was times when I have attempted suicide when I was younger. I was electrocuted working away on stage. Actually electrocuted through a microphone when I was singing, and was on a life support machine for a couple of weeks with an irregular heartbeat. I've got scars from it, and really didn't deal with that, and ended up trying to take my life a couple of times, and pulling myself forward. With all the work that I've done with my singing, that gave me the ability to write the poetry, and all these tests that I've had in my past have made me stronger and shown me what's important in life. So when it came to me with my diagnosis with low vision, it didn't take me long for my that thing inside me that kicks in when I feel as if I'm at bottom to say, you need to keep going, Dave. That resilience in me kicked in because of all those things that I'd done. And, when it got to writing the poetry, when it all started spilling out of me, when I started to write every day, sometimes 2 or 3 a day, I knew that I'd found my purpose again. I knew that there was a reason that I was doing this. Everything that I'd done before had given me the ability to write what I was doing and talk about the things that I was able to talk about, to be able to connect with people through these words. So coming to America, I came to America, as I said, in October, November time, and the response there at every one of my readings, speaking at big events for charities and doing some corporate events where I was motivational speaking and talking about my story. Hearing that response from people who had low vision and could connect with my words, but then also seeing people who have no experience of low vision or don't know anyone who's affected by blindness close their eyes and put themselves in my position was an amazing experience to have. And it's like that at every event that I do, that response that I get. But the incident that that Debra was just talking about there, I was doing an event in Rhode Island at Rhode Island College, and I did an hour presentation, did a Q&A, and then was doing some book signings. And there was a guy in the room in his late 20s, early 30s, and there was something about him. He looked out of place. There was something about him that was drawing my attention to him. And eventually he was looking at me. He was kind of nervous, and he comes up while I'm signing some books, and I introduced myself. I said, hi, what's your name? He said, oh, my name's Derek. I said, Dave, pleased to meet you. I said, what brings you here today? And he said to me, I was just diagnosed with RP on Monday. And this was Wednesday. And I was like, oh, okay. So I said, look, I'm really, really sorry to hear that. I said, can you just do me a favor? Just come and sit with me at this table here. And I took him away from where there was a queue of people, and I sat him down at the side so we could just talk. And I said, look, it's only been 5 years for me at the time. I said, I remember how it feels. I said, how you doing? Tell me your story. So he turned around, he said, it was only a couple of days ago, but I went into an eye test. I thought I had cataracts, and they looked in the back of my eyes and they said, I have RP, that I'm probably going to go blind and it might affect my children. Do you have any kids? And he said, yeah, I've got 3. So he'd pretty much been left like that while he was waiting for another appointment. He'd gone home, and I said, how have you been feeling? He said, and this is me getting upset now thinking about it. He said, I'd been in tears 1 minute, angry the next, going through all those stages of loss in a very short period of time. And he went online to research RP, and one of the first things he found was one of my poems. And when he read it, it struck a chord with him. And then he was in work that Wednesday, and his wife called him, and she said, you're never going to believe this, but Dave Steele's in America. And not only is he in America, he's in Rhode Island. And this guy walked out of his work, jumped in his car, and drove an hour straight to come and see me. He was like, I just need to go and meet him. And he just came to see me, and I was just like, oh my God. I literally goosebumps just standing up as soon as he said that. I was thinking, what are the chances of him being there, or me being there 2 days after his diagnosis when he just found one of my poems, and it's helped in that way. It was crazy. But that's the power of music, and that's the power of poetry. We've all had maybe a song that's gotten us through a teenage heartbreak when we were younger and things like that. And, and having the power of social media where you can just click a button, write something, because I've written over 700 poems now. None of them have taken me longer than 20 minutes. Because if it's not flowing from the heart, it's not worth writing. You click a button, send it around the world, and for someone maybe having a bad day, sat in a darkened room somewhere, you can say to them, you're not alone. someone else knows exactly how you feel, and don't worry, it's going to be fine. And that's just a gift that I found at my lowest. And I just feel totally blessed that I've been able to do this and able to reach more people with the help of yourselves as well.
So do you want to?
I will, yeah.
We've reached pretty much the end of our allotted time. So if you want to do the poem and then we'll close, that would be great.
Yeah,
we definitely want to do the poem.
We definitely want the poem.
Yeah. This poem I wrote for my daughter, who's now 12. She's called Ellie. She lives in Glasgow. And with there being a 1 in 2 chance that she could lose her sight when she was older, I wanted to write a poem about when's the right time to have that conversation, when's the right time to tell her about something like that, because it's a tricky conversation to have, especially with someone that you don't live with every day. And this one's called The Secret. It took me years to come to terms with how my eyes declined, through stages of acceptance, of slowly going blind. But nothing I could ever do would allow me to prepare to tell my little girl a thing I still don't want to share. It's tortured me through sleepless nights, consumed my mind with guilt. This secret I have kept from her could break the trust I've built. I pray that she will understand the things I've tried to do, and why I never told her that she could be 1 in 2. For she is still a child and far too young to burden with a fate that I might pass to her, for now's her time to live. But soon will come a moment when I know she must be told, when all the battles I have won, I'll pass for her to hold. But for every unheard question, there's an answer I've prepared. They're written in each line, each verse, each poem that I've shared. For every page I've filled, I've emptied out my heart and soul, so one day she would know the way. That's always been my goal. So Ellie, I hope years from now, you'll be there reading this. Know you can do amazing things, whether RP hit or miss. My inheritance to you won't be a passed down faulty gene, but knowing all life's beauty that this VIP has seen.
Fantastic.
Beautiful, so beautiful. And before we turn it over to Neil to close, will you just tell the guest what your website is? So, I mean, you have 3 books.
Yeah.
You tour. You do corporate events. You're available. I love your work, Dave. I love your work.
Thank you very much. No, I really appreciate it. So the books are called Stand By Me RP. Stand By Me RP, and then there's Volume 2 and there's Volume 3, which are all available on Amazon. We didn't call Stand By Me RP Volume 1 because we didn't think there was going to be a Volume 2. The website is called theblindpoet.net, which is just about to launch, theblindpoet.net. It's available at the moment, but we're just launching it officially next week when I'm out in America. And all the details on there about booking me for events, for corporate, and coming to read poetry and speak and tell my story and reach more people. Is all through the website there. So hopefully, anyone that wants to come and hear me speak a bit more can reach out.
You have beautiful
Fantastic.
work. And it's not just for people with RP, it's for all of us.
No, certainly
Go
not.
ahead, Neil.
Anyone that goes through anxiety, depression, PTSD, things like that, most people can relate to things in there.
Yeah, life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Dave. So I also need to thank our supporters that keep us going, and we're in our soon-to-be 6th year of AXSChat now. Particularly need to thank and congratulate Barclays Access and Paul Smythe on his OBE. Fantastic to see recognition for all of the work that Paul's done. Well done, Paul. Thank NASA, CRB, OBE from Microlink. Bit of a theme going on here. We need OBEs from MyClearText next. But all 3 organizations help us be more accessible and get the message out. So really want to thank them for the continued support in this new decade. And thank you, Dave. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Real pleasure to be on here. Thank you very much. Thank you.